about epidemiology, you may think, oh, what is this epidemiology? How boring is it? Because I remember as you know, when we were doing our undergrad, so PSM classes used to be the one which you wanted to give a miss. But I think, we should have paid more attention now, because then to understand the magnitude of the problem and to respond accordingly, you need to understand the magnitude of the disease, and epidemiology comes in handy. So, when you talk of epidemiology, you will talk about what are the causes that lead to cancer. And there are some things that we know and most things that we don't know. Be very sure on this, that, there are fewer things that we know than we don't. That what we don't know is a bigger thing. So we do know that there are certain cancers which happens because of viruses, like I spoke in the last lecture also. So Kaposi, sarcomas, lymphomas of the central nervous system, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, cancer of the cervix is all because of infection or because of a virus. Then we do know hepatitis B or hepatitis C virus may be associated with hepatocellular carcinoma, with the squamous cell carcinomas of cervix happening because of the human papilloma virus, and an interesting association with oral cancer also. So we do know that viruses, what they do is they integrate their genome with ours and modulate the functions of our proto-oncogenes and tumor suppressor genes and convert them into oncogenes and set up this cycle of making cancer. So when we talk of cancer, we have to talk about the incidence of cancer, and we also know that, if you talk about breast cancer specifically, we will say that breast cancer is the commonest cancer amongst women. In our country, yes. Cervical cancer used to be the number one cancer, but now it has been overtaken by breast cancer. So how do we know this? We know this because there are bodies which are monitoring the trends or the epidemiology or the statistics, and that is how they know that this is how this particular cancer has overtaken cervical cancer. So in developed countries, you see a different spectrum, and in developing countries, you do see a different spectrum. So that is how you're supposed to respond. So, we cannot blindly apply whatever happens in the West to us, because the reasons for our cancers or the risk factors for our cancers, the incidence of our cancers is all kind of different from what is happening in the West. So we will do a little, a recap of what we spoke about in the last class and just touch upon it in slightly greater detail when we talk about the hereditary and genetic factors leading to cancer. So that is when the conversation shifts to proto-oncogenes, the cancer genes, and the tumor suppressor genes and the cell cycle regulatory genes. So if you look at proto-oncogenes, tumor suppressor genes, and cell cycle regulatory genes, these are the three things that keep cell division in check. So all the functions in the body are controlled by genes. So the genes are encoded in the DNA, and DNA is what makes up the chromosome, which is the genetic library of our cells. So that is where the genes are housed. So when you talk of a breast cancer or an ovarian cancer, we often talk about a Bracha One gene. So these are normal genes. So mind you, it doesn't mean that if you have a BRCA gene means you're going to have cancer. It is a mutation which it happens on a BRCA1 which sits on chromosome number 17, or a BRCA2 gene which sits on a chromosome number 13, that these cancers happen when there is a mutation. So interestingly, we will be talking of P53 as you grow in your knowledge of cancer. P53 is one gene which you cannot keep out because this is associated with a large spectrum of cancers. And it is a transcription factor that switches on expression of genes, and these genes regulate the cell cycle. And how does it regulate it? Either by, arresting the growth or leading the cell to suicide, which we in technical terms is apoptosis. So apoptosis and growth arrest are the two mechanisms by which P53 regulates the expression of genes. And it is also known as the guardian of the genome because it maintains the integrity of the coding that is happening within the genetic materials. So that's an interesting concept. So remember that P53 is the guardian of the genome because it prevents all of these unwanted mechanisms which affect cell division from happening. So what happens is when there is a mutation in the P53 gene, by indirectly promoting cancer behaves as an oncogene also. So now the p53 gene can behave both as a tumor suppressor gene and an oncogene depending on whether or not it is mutated. So now p53 has two alleles. When one of them is mutated, the other allele can take care of the functions. The problems happen when the other allele also gets affected. So what happens is that the mutant gene produces a protein that suppresses the function of the second gene when there are repeated insults to it, and that is how it becomes an oncogene.